We're not Microsoft. What we teach here is our own experience, sometimes our own interpretation. As I will show you in this training, even in the Microsoft terms and conditions, not everything is perfectly clear. Some things are just purely missing, and some things require interpretation. They may be interpreted differently. We give you our own view, which is based on practical approach, on audits we've been to. I just know how they think. So, but anyway, by all means, verify all this with Microsoft product terms. How do you find them? Either use this link or just Google Microsoft product terms, and there you'll find them. And we're moving on to Windows Server, which is actually the second most popular topic according to the poll I did on the community tab on this channel. The first, so SQL Server was the winner. Windows Server came second, obviously. I mean, nobody cares about Exchange. Well, some people do still. So I have a question for you, and you can just answer it in your convenient time. I don't want to keep it on screen for too long. This is not a quiz. I'm just asking you, what's the oldest Windows Server version that runs in your estate or your client's estate? Because in my experience, I've recently seen Windows NT 4. Do you even remember what that is? So Windows 2000 is not that rare either. So people run various versions. We're going to talk about the most recent today, most recent version. But what I encourage you to do is something upfront to tell you about all what I'm talking about. And I have specific highlights on the SQL Server part when I'm going to be telling you always, if you're using an old license assigned to an old instance, these rules may not apply. Go to the product terms, go to the archive, and find the terms for that version. Because, for instance, with Windows Server, current version is 2022, just released. So versions 2022, 2019, 2016, they're licensed the same way. 2012 R2 and 2012 are licensed differently. 2008 R2 and previous are licensed in the third way. They have different metrics. They have different rules. They have different virtualization rules. And you just can't apply this knowledge that you're getting today about the latest versions to the old ones. So maybe one day we'll release, this is not going to be free. That is not going to be free. I'm sorry, but we'll release the training, but I'm not going to make it too expensive. Somewhere on Udemy, where you can buy a training for $5. A training specifically about how to manage various versions of Windows and SQL, because that's what we do. In the real life situations, we're not dealing with Windows 2019 everywhere. No, that is a blue sky thinking. Take off your rose-tinted eyes. Nobody does that. People still run 2000. People still run 2000 something. So yeah, we have an answer from Raimi. Windows NT, nice. Well, yes, yeah. As I said, I used to promote Windows NT when I was in my previous job. Even before that, I was NT4. Yeah, see. But anyway, we're going to talk about the hottest topic, which is Windows 2012 today. But then again, I'll remind you, almost everything I say, there are very slight differences, still applies to 2019 and 2016. So three versions, one, the current and two back, are licensed per core plus Cal. So there are three current editions, Datacentre Standard and Essentials. So Datacentre Standard is probably what you're going to be dealing with 99% of time, unless you're dealing with small businesses that may buy Windows Server Essentials, which supports up to 25 people. It's a technical limitation. And we have a slide about Essentials as well. Very popular in the States, surprisingly also popular in Central Europe. I was quite, and Western Europe, I was quite surprised. I was told by the German Microsoft that it's a popular product. So there's one caveat here about the current version. Windows Server Essentials, as of now, as of today, is still version 2019. So they haven't yet released version 2012 for Windows Server Essentials, and we are unclear if that's going to happen. So the current version for Datacentre and Standard is 2022. The current version for Essentials is 2019. And again, that's not very much critical because license-wise, they're very similar, the 2019 and 2022. Windows Server is one of those rare Microsoft products that has down editioning rights. So if you attended previous trainings, there are two types of downgrades. One is the downgrade. So what we call downgrade is a version downgrade from 2022 to 2019. There's also down edition right. Please don't mix them up. Please don't confuse them. So when we talk about down edition, that's about editions from Datacenter to standard, from Datacenter to essentials, from standard to essentials. These are the allowed down edition paths. When we talk about downgrades, that is about the version when the software was released. I have 3 videos on this channel talking about, I think 4, talking about differences between versions and editions, because that's something that bothers me every time I engage with someone. Every time I have this conversation, I ask people about versions, they give me editions instead, and vice versa. Don't confuse them. It's very important. So, downgrade to any version is available in volume licensing and CSP. So unless you bought it as a box, you can downgrade it to down to Windows NT 3.51, not even 4. Down editioning is like on the screen. So before 2012, there was another edition called Windows Server Enterprise. It was actually, at the time, it was higher than standard. But right now, current standard licenses may be downgraded to Enterprise. Datacenter 2, sorry, I forgot to put a link there. So Datacenter can also be downgraded to Enterprise, obviously. Datacenter can be, down edition. I made this mistake right now. Down edition to any, Datacenter may be down edition to any version. What does it mean? It means that you assign the license of Windows Server Datacenter, you license the box properly for Datacenter, but instead you install Enterprise 2008. That's perfectly fine. That's what's called down edition rights. Right. Moving on. The licensing model for Windows Server is per core plus CAL. Windows Server always requires some sort of access licenses. There are very few excuses. And right now, from top of my head, I can't even remember one. So there's always a requirement for some sort of a client license. It could be CAL, client access license. It could be CAL equivalent. We have a slide about CAL equivalents later in the presentation. I'll explain you what that is. The licensing metric for the server licenses is processor core. One hardware processor core, not a hyper-thread, not a processor, physical processor core. Let me show you something. For those who don't know what that is, I decided to keep the slides from I cover them better in the first presentation, but just for those who are joining, absolutely just, fresh to licensing world today with this live, hardware metrics. So in the beginning, there were just server licenses. So when the licensing started, Microsoft, Oracle, I don't remember, maybe Oracle started from processors straight away, but I still think they started from server licenses a long time ago, Microsoft too. And then what started happening is, bigger servers. Okay, sorry, let me go back a bit. How people scaled up? They bought new servers, more servers. If you then sell them licenses per server, this is how you earn money. Microsoft is a commercial organization as well, not just technology. Commerce, on the other hand, as well. Their stocks on the market don't go up because they create great products. It's because they're great at sales. Combination of both. So at some point, some clever people decided, we're going to buy multi-processor servers, because now we have multi-processor servers. The technology is mature enough. I remember that time when multi-processor servers appeared in the IBM PC world. And then what happens? Microsoft started selling fewer server licenses because people started scaling up by buying multi-processor servers. So Microsoft changed the metric to processor, now demanding multiple processor servers per one server, counting the processors. There was always a minimum of 2, by the way, in the Microsoft world. So you couldn't assign less than 2 server licenses to a server. But the story goes on. So I don't remember who that was, Intel or AMD, but they came up with this idea of processor cores, which is essentially just dividing the processor or more like creating a more complicated processor with multiple processors in it. So each core in the processor is actually like a small processor itself, just in one socket. So then again, now to scale up, we don't need to buy 8 processor, an 8 processor server. We would rather buy a 2 processor server with 4 cores in each processor. Microsoft is losing money. And they decide, okay, fine, from Windows Server 2016, actually SQL Server 2012, they switched to core licenses. Following case with Oracle, by the way. So, and IBM and many others. IBM have this processor value units, but they're very much revolving around processor cores as well. So that's what it is. I hope it was more or less clear. And the virtual machines usually a virtual processor is a replica of a physical core on the hardware server. Usually, there may be exceptions. I'll try and touch on them, but I'd like to keep this training simple. There's enough material here anyway. So, how do you calculate core licenses for Windows Server? Firstly, you always calculate them at the hardware level. You never calculate virtual cores for Windows Server. Only hardware, physical cores on the host, on the box. Hope it settles in. 4 steps. Firstly, count the physical processor. Then you need to know how many cores there are in each processor. Then basically, what you need to do is you assign at least 8 licenses to each CPU, at least 8 core licenses. And then you assign at least 16 licenses to the entire box. So we have 2 minimums. For those of you who are Excel, lovers of Excel, I have an Excel formula at the bottom of this slide. You put the formula in Excel, you reference the correct fields, and this is how you get the number of licenses that is required. So if you want Excel to think for you. But that's it. So at least 8 core licenses per one physical processor, at least. So if it has 4 cores, you still need to assign 8. And at least 16 licenses for the entire host. So you have 2 minimums. So if you have 1 processor, you still need to assign 16 core licenses at least. If it's bigger, it's bigger. That is simple. I have a few examples which I will show you just a bit later, how to calculate on examples. How do you purchase core licenses? So core licenses, 1 core license. If you look product terms, it's very clear. There's no doubt about it. People who say otherwise never read product terms. They heard it from a friend or from a salesperson. Trusting salespeople, why would you do that? But anyway, so core licenses are sold in packs. At 1 2-core pack contains 2 single core licenses. And then the logic follows. An 8-core pack contains 8 licenses, which you then take and assign. 16-core pack has 16 licenses. Simple. So always, I won't share the Excel formula, but you can always come back and just rewatch this video, pause there and retype it. It's short. It's really short. So I'm sorry, maybe one day, but not today. Apologies for that. So what sometimes happens is many times I've seen effective licensing positions or offers or any other calculations done in core packs instead of cores. Always calculate everything in cores. But when somebody gives you a calculation, always clarify with them, are we talking about single cores or are we talking about packs? It's very important. You can overpay twice, 8 times, easily. I've seen it. Now, moving on. This is something which I keep telling about. I have a couple of videos on this channel, and I had a rant about it in my first live. Beware this dodgy sales tactics. Not necessarily always that people are evil. People were just taught by other people who didn't have a clue. So let me remind you, a pack is not a license. There are no 16-core licenses. It just doesn't exist. There is no 16-core license. There are no 8-core licenses. There are no 2-core licenses. Licenses are single-core licenses. And the rules say you must assign core licenses. They don't say you must assign packs. Why am I saying this? Is if you have 2 servers and you have 3 16-core packs, and you're like, I have too many on this server and too few licenses on this server, you can break a core pack because it's not a license. It's breakable. You don't even think that. Don't attach yourself to licenses. There are no 16-core licenses. Forget that. Just forget that. The single core licenses, please don't make that mistake. It's not financially very damaging, but you can lose 10, 20K here and there, dollars, easily, if you understand this. Here are a few formulas, how you calculate licenses for Windows Server, a few examples. So in the first picture, the top picture, we have a server, single processor, single core, because the minimum for the server is 16. You still have to assign 16 licenses because that's the minimum for the server. Second picture is similar. We have 2 processors, 4 core each. If you just calculate them per processor, remember there's a minimum of 8 cores per processor. You would still get to 16. You would still get to 16 somehow in this case, because that's the minimum. We have 2 minimums, 8 licenses per processor minimum, or minimum 16 licenses per server. With bigger servers, it gets a bit funnier. So on the top on this page is an old legacy server, like something from, I don't know, 1995, 4 single core processors, because the minimum per processor is 8 cores. You have to assign 32 cores to that server, 8 multiplied by 4. And if you have a processor with 20 cores, then you just assign 20 licenses because it's above the minimums. The only thing you have to worry about is never assign less than the minimums. Use that Excel formula on the other slide. And by the way, talking about sharing the Excel formula, I think if I export this PowerPoint into a PDF, you will be able to just copy and paste it as text. Hopefully, I think. So then that was about the physical calculations. What about virtual machines? So for those who don't know what virtualization is, and we have people like that on these lives who have just come to the world of IT, they have no idea what virtualization is. Virtual machine is like a pretend computer inside the physical one. So there's a physical computer, physical box, laptop, server probably, and then inside the server you run a software called hypervisor, which creates bubbles that pretend to be computers. So those are virtual machines, full-on computers, but they're not physical. That's why they're called virtual. So when we say physical OSE, that means the operating system running on the hardware directly, without any layers between the hardware and the physical OSE. When we say virtual OSE, it means that it's running in that hypervisor, in that bubble. So virtualization is a great thing, but also all the vendors when they saw virtualization, Microsoft caught up with it in about 2005. So it was already popular in 2003. Microsoft only in 2005 introduced the first rules about virtualization. So obviously they want more money. They wanted to pay more, and now you need to count virtual machines. How? I'm going to explain. So. And now we also have containers, which are not virtual machines. It gets interesting. So some of the slides are very geeky and technical. I can't avoid that because some of the people here on these lives as well are geeky and technical. So for those of you who can't follow, you will. For those of you who want to know about containers, this is where we are. So when you calculate those required cores as I've just explained, and you assign Windows Server data center cores to a server, say 16 data center cores. You license the server for an unlimited number of virtual machines and containers. It doesn't matter how many bubbles, how many virtual machines, how many of those kind of pretend computers you create and run on that host. It's unlimited. As long as you license all the processors and cores following all the formulas I've just explained, you can have unlimited virtualization. But data center edition license is quite expensive. It's quite expensive. I think it's about 4 times more expensive than the standard. And if you only have a limited number, a low number of virtual machines, it does make sense to consider Windows Server Standard because it works exactly the same way, but there's a limit on the number of virtual machines. How that works is you still assign Windows Server Standard license to the hardware level, and then when you've licensed that machine this way, you can run up to 2 virtual machines or containers with Hyper-V isolation. Because containers with Hyper-V isolation, in effect, they are virtual machines as well. They're actually not true containers; they're virtual machines. So these type of VMs, virtual machines and containers with Hyper-V isolation, you need to count them. I have a formula as well. We'll get to that. So you license the entire processors and cores following all the rules, and you can run up to 2 virtual machines if the licenses that you assigned are standard edition licenses. To reiterate, Datacentre Unlimited standard 2 VMs. Moving on. I don't think it's nice to 7, but okay. Thanks, Steven. Steven just posted. So if you're watching the chat, there we go. You can just copy it from the chat. Steven, thanks very much. Actually, hi Nitin. Hi Sam. Thank you for being with us loyally for so long. So Ravi posted here 1 to 7 is the pricing ratio. Maybe it may be 1 to 7. I think it's actually 1. I don't remember, to be honest, but maybe. Core Infrastructure Service Suite, by the way, has a different ratio, so you need to know both if you want to commercially calculate. Every time we do calculations for the customer, we'll look at their prices, which are their CPS, and when you get additional discounts from Microsoft or you buy licenses, platform licenses, or somehow else, this ratio may actually fluctuate. So that's maybe the 1 to 7, maybe the default ratio, but it may change based on the customer. Not drastically, but it may. Right. So how do I hide this? Could you please provide small definition of containers? A virtual machine creates a full-on operating system. It's an operating system. You have to install Windows Server. You have to deploy all the patches. You have to configure it as you would have configured a physical server. A container runs inside an already installed operating system. It creates an isolated bubble, but it reuses all the settings and all the resources of the operating system in which it runs. That's the easiest technical explanation I can give. It's not so it doesn't create a full virtual machine. It reuses the resources of the machine at which it runs. Read about it somewhere because I actually have a video, very entry-level video on this channel. We have more than 100 videos here, which talks about containers in simple terms. So yeah, you can watch it. You can watch it now. You can watch it later. Rather later. I don't want it to drop off. So license stacking. So what is license stacking? So if you need more virtual machines under standard licenses, and people ask, Can we actually, Karin, thank you for becoming a member. Yee! You can see, if you're on YouTube, you can see that Karin just joined the membership. So Karin, thanks very much for supporting us, supporting what we do, our cause. So, okay, going back to stacking. If you need to assign more, if you need to run more virtual machines, but you're not ready to commit to Datacentre yet, what you can do is you can license the cores again for the second time. So if you assign 16 cores, you need to assign another 16, and that gives you right for 2 more VMs. You assign another 16 cores, that gives you right for 2 more VMs. Obviously, when I say 16, that's an example. It may be 40 in your case, 40 and 40 and 40, or like 80 and 80. I've seen this, 80 and 80 and 80, huge service. People license with standard licenses because the difference was pretty big. So it does make sense. It's a less expensive solution to stack licenses like this. I have a video about stacking as well. So it does make sense to do it when you have less than 7 virtual machines on a single host. or less than 4 VMs when you assign core infrastructure server suite licenses, which I'll talk about later, because the threshold is different. The difference between core infrastructure suite standard and core infrastructure suite Datacenter is not as it is for Windows Server licenses. I say on this slide, do not do this in clusters. Only do this on standalone hosts only. So for those of you who really understand the advanced side of how clusters work, if you have less than 7 Windows Server machines in total in the entire cluster, then it also makes sense to assign standard licenses to the cluster. So I usually, in my head, I have this 7 and 4 thresholds because I've done this exercise many times for a cluster. So it's, but in the entire cluster, I've seen clusters where the majority of virtual machines are Linuxes, and they only run 2 or 3 Windows standard virtual machines. In that case, and I'll explain you how to calculate it. In that case, you can actually review licensing with Windows Server Standard because it's simply cheaper. But then, now I'm explaining you how you do that. So when you have multiple hosts in a cluster, and for those of you who don't know what the cluster is, please wait. In 3 slides from now, I'll show you what a cluster is. I have a picture. So when you have multiple hosts in a cluster, and you have machines roaming around, VMware, Hyper-V, they roam around the cluster. They move freely. What Microsoft requires you to do, if you use license stacking, is to license each host for the maximum number of VMs in the cluster, total cluster. I know it's not a fair rule, but that's the way it works. So thus, when you're thinking about the cluster, is it cheaper to assign Windows Server Standard license to a cluster? Count the total number of Windows Server VMs, the total. And, well, as long as at least one of them is Windows Server Datacenter, that virtual machine, and I've seen mistakes like that, you have to assign Datacenter license. You can't cover it with standard. There's no down addition from standard to Datacenter. But if all these virtual machines are Windows Server Standard, you count them, and they're less than 7 in the cluster, use Windows Server Standard license in the cluster. So that was an advanced note. If you didn't understand it now, don't worry about it. It's too advanced. So how do you calculate the required licenses when you want to stack them, when you have more than 2 virtual machines? It's a bit more complicated. Step number 1, count all the virtual machines and containers with Hyper-V isolation. Let's assume that you counted them together. We create a variable called X. That is the sum of all the virtual machines and Hyper-V containers. Say they're 5, just for the purposes of this example. You counted 5. Then the question you need to ask yourself is, do I do anything else at the physical layer as well? Because we need to count it otherwise. Except for just running the Hyper-V or running System Center components, managing the host. So I'll give you an example. If you run a SQL Server database at the physical level, you also need to add it to X. So let's assume we run the SQL Server database at the physical level. Now we have number 6. We have 6 licensable operating system environments. Containers with Hyper-V isolation count as operating system environments. Now we divide it by 2. What do we get? We get 3. Then we multiply that 3 by the number of the required cores. And a bit more complicated formula is at the bottom of the slide. I hope I haven't made a mistake in it. I haven't tested it in Excel. I just typed it like this because, well, I think it's correct. But you can test it now, and then they'll let me know if that's correct or not. So, I need a little break. I'm still having this fever, so which is just a few seconds. In the meanwhile, while I'm having this break, what I'd like you to do is please click like. Yeah, sorry, okay, just a few seconds.
Until Alex gets back after he takes a short Red Bull, that I told him beforehand that he should try reduce the amount of caffeine that he's taking. So if if you think the same and Alex's health is important, then give us a thumbs up. I think that's also pretty important. We're looking
Thank you,
out for
Darrell.
you, Alex.
Thank you.
And if you are liking the current session, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. We really appreciate it. And if you don't like the session, tell us as well and provide us with feedback so we can continue to improve and move forward. Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you, Samuel.
Yeah, thank you.
Samuel is a good. I would call him. He's a good friend of mine. We chat a lot on LinkedIn. Yeah. Right. Thanks, Jason. Enjoy some tea and water. Well, I'm drinking water and drinking Red Bull. The Red Bull is almost done. So, but I wouldn't be standing right now if I haven't had that Red Bull, because I went to bed at about 12. I woke up at 3, couldn't sleep anymore. Just went back and to improve the slides for today's presentation. Okay. Sacrifice yourself for the people. So this is a cluster. So what's a cluster? Cluster is a group of hosts running virtual machines. What is the main feature of the cluster is that if any node fails or is overloaded, other nodes in the cluster, other services in the cluster, take other VMs on themselves. So virtual machines move around. So here's a simplification of a cluster on this picture. This is a simplification. In which I have 3 virtual machines, and I assigned, because licenses, watch the first session, I repeat that all the time. Licenses are always assigned to the hosts, even licenses with software assurance and license mobility. We'll get to that. They are assigned to the hosts. So I assign 2 licenses for those 2 VMs to the first host. As I said, it's a simplification. And I assigned 1 license to the second host. But what happens in a real cluster is I try to animate it here. Look at that. Move around like 2 to the third host, then 1 went back to the first one. Now, because the licenses are attached to the hosts, now we have an extra license on the host number 1, which we don't need that, but we have a missing license on the third host. So obviously the idea that comes to mind, okay, I'll just take that license and drop it on the third host. Well, when your machine's moving like this, you never know when, at what time, how many machines will be on which host. So, and the default rule for reassigning licenses for any software in Microsoft is 90 days. So you may only take it from the host after it's spent there 90 days. Like in quarantine, you like we now fly in COVID and you have to spend 2 weeks in the hotel. It's the same. You assign license to a host and it stays there for 90 days. You can't take it. Obviously, but I understand that there's all virtual things like virtual licenses. They're not real. You don't really put stickers on the computer. But that's the rule. You have to be compliant. You have to follow that rule. And some licenses have license mobility in server farms. Windows Server doesn't. So Windows Server license may only be reassigned once in 90 days. There's no circumvention of that rule for Windows Server. I love this one. I'm sorry, I'll put it on the screen. Alex, you have spread the fever to us. Microsoft licensing fever is getting contagious. Thank you. You know what? I'm going to use that somewhere on LinkedIn. I'll put it somewhere if you don't mind. So what about virtual clusters then? So how do we license Windows Server? Assuming what you've just seen, clusters containing multiple hosts, how do you license Windows Server in virtual clusters? So the default idea that you must have, should have, is I'm going to license the cluster with Windows Server Datacentre licenses for unlimited virtualization and forget about this entire headache of reassigning licenses. Because if you license every host with Datacentre, then, whatever those virtual machines are doing there, every host is unlimited. Therefore, it's complete freedom. Move around, go there, go here. But what if you use stacking? So standardization makes very little sense. As I told you, seven VMs in a cluster, or 4 VMs if you have core infrastructure service suite. Using standardization licenses in a cluster Only makes sense when it's like a heavily Linux cluster and you have just a few Windows Server machines. Or, by the way, good example as well, VDI clusters, where you run the majority of the VMs are Windows 10. You don't need Windows Server licenses. For them, they license differently. How they're licensed, I explained in the previous session, actually, in the previous training, part 4. So you only count Windows Server machines. I've seen heavy 10 nodes, huge amount of RAMs, memory clusters, in which there was only one Windows Server Stand machine running, just controlling this whole environment. Why? I would have put it in a different cluster, but they decided to do so. So for that cluster, makes sense to license every host with Windows Server Standard license because it's a cheaper solution. But follow all these caveats that are on this slide. Follow all these caveats that are on this slide. Now, as I said, Windows Server always requires licensing client access somehow. And we have various CALs, so I put 3 here, which are probably the most popular. There's also Microsoft Identity Manager CAL as well. But, you know, let's keep it high level. Let's keep it just so I can explain you the principles. We won't go very much into detail. So internal users of devices, so companies, employees, companies, on-site contractors, not just employees, on-site contractors, people who are working directly for the company, not necessarily employees of the company, they're internal. External users are clients, you know, people from the internet that visit the website, you know, maybe connect to some e-commerce systems, but not employees, not contractors. Those are external users. So for internal users, you either assign user CALs to users, or you assign device CALs to their devices. We have a very, very large session about CALs in the first part of the training. And also, I've already cut it out and put it on this channel as just a video about CALs. It's just a part of the first training. I put it, I made it, I removed all the blah, 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 and just kept the essence. So you can watch that to understand what CALs are, client access licenses. External users, you may actually, if you know the exact number, which usually you don't, but if you know the exact number, you may license them with CALs. But Microsoft and auditors would look at that very skeptically. How do you calculate your internet users? How do you calculate the number of customers that are connecting? So if you can't do that and in a provable way, in a way where you can prove that your calculation is correct, Microsoft recommends using a different license, which is called external connector. So external connector is assigned to a hardware host. So I need to, for the next version of this training, I need to put together a few pictures, but apologies, I spent 16 hours on this presentation. I just didn't have time to make a picture here, but let me just use your imagination. So if you have a single host in which there are 10 virtual machines and 5 of them provide services to the outside world, you don't need 5 external connectors. Because as I said, connectors are assigned to hardware hosts. You have only one host, and no matter how many virtual machines there are, you only need to assign one Windows Server external connector to that host. Because at least one VM there is serving an outside world. There's another case I dealt with one customer where they had a cluster with 10 hosts and only one virtual machine served to the outside world. And you may think, okay, so because I have 10 hosts and the virtual machine may move around, do I need to assign 10 external connectors? It's a good question. If you buy external connectors without software assurance, then yes, you have to license every single host in the cluster with an external connector. But if you buy external connector with software assurance and maintain active software assurance on the external connector, then external connector has license mobility rights, which means as long as software assurance is active, it moves across the hosts of the farm, of the cluster. The license moves together with the virtual machine without the chains of the 90 days rule. So basically, the formula there, sorry, it's not on screen, the formula there, so if you have a cluster and you have virtual machines serving the outside world, is the minimal number between the number of hosts and the number of VMs, as long as you have software assurance on your licenses. That's it. Need to make a picture. Somebody remind me. Somebody email me, to that ask@SAMexpert.com. Alex, please put this picture about external connectors in the next version. I'll forget about it. Hopefully not. So there are some client access dependencies. So there's, for example, what is a remote desktop services client access license? So remote desktop services client access license allows you to connect to the server remotely and have a graphical desktop on it. So you may install Office on the server. Citrix is a good example. So Citrix solutions require remote desktop services client access licenses in addition to Citrix licenses. So if you know what Citrix is, it's basically a client access license that you need to be eligible to have a right to open that remote desktop session from home, connecting to your to the server in your office. A remote desktop call always requires also Windows Server call because you are connecting to Windows Server. So when you use a remote desktop service, you have to have two calls, remote desktop call and the Windows Server call. So always, it's a requirement. Same with Active Directory Rights Management Services. I'm not going to explain you what that is. That is complicated. But if you have RMS calls, Rights Management Services, they also require, in addition, Windows Server calls. Situation when you have more user calls for RDS than Windows Server calls for the server is non-compliant, unless you have call equivalents, but they also count as calls. So the left side always requires the right side on this slide, and we're going to have a few more call dependency slides here as well because it's an important topic. And so when we're going to be talking about other Microsoft service. So Essential Edition, Windows Server Edition is for small organizations. Current version is 2019, as I said. It has lots of limitations. So domain trust is not permitted. It can be one domain. It's not licensed per core. It's licensed per instance. You just basically buy one license for one server for Essential Edition. But then again, it only may have 25 users and ID. Very simple licensing model. The only caveat is remote desktop just doesn't work on it. So there are no remote desktop calls. Windows Server calls are not required in Essential Edition, but RMS calls, Rights Management Services calls are required. It's at one hand it's simplified licensing, on the other hand it's a bit complicated. But to be honest, I've never seen in my entire career anybody needing RMS calls on an Essential Edition. Usually they just drop it in there. It's a small company, 15 people in it. You don't need calls. It just works, one license. Right. So if you want to can you use your Windows licenses that you bought in Azure? Yes, you can. So for Windows Server Standard, if your licenses are covered with software assurance or you bought them through CSP, subscription licenses, you can use them either on premises or on Azure. If you have Windows Server Datacenter license with current software assurance, active software assurance, you can use them simultaneously at the same time in your data center and in Azure. There is a dual use right when you can use a Windows Server Standard at the same time in Azure and in your data center when you're migrating one way from your data center to Azure for 180 days. When that 180 days expires, that period expires, gone. Thanks, Frederick. I think this server session is something that, there's something that you should really be able to easily understand. And I hope I'm getting better as well. So for those of you who know, so this is a shout out, Frederick Philipson. If you're not following redress compliance on YouTube, you're making a mistake because he's doing the same about Oracle. Windows Server Standard in Azure, as I said, can reassign back after 90 days. But anyway, dual use is only allowed for 180 days. Many people ask, can I use Standard Edition when I'm migrating? Yes, you can, 180 days. But make sure you record when you started it and you have all the documents, all the proof that it's only been 180 days or less. Otherwise, you can get yourself in trouble if Microsoft decides to audit you, if they do. Windows Server Datacentre, as I said, dual use is allowed on premises and in Azure virtual machines, so by all means. Except when you assign Windows Server Datacentre licenses to Azure dedicated hosts at the hardware level for unlimited virtualization. In that case, it's a one-way migration, 180 days. That's it. And then you either use them on premises or on dedicated hosts in Azure, which includes the very popular these days Azure VMware solution. If you assign Datacentre licenses to host in an Azure VMware solution, then you must unassign them on premises. How do you calculate licenses that you need in Azure for virtual machines? And in the third training in this series, I explain why you would do so, because it saves you money. It's cheaper to use your own licenses through Azure Hybrid Benefit than to pay pay-as-you-go rates in Azure. There's a substantial discount. If you're not using that, you're making a big mistake. So you have to assign minimum of 16 cores to Azure. So set aside 16 cores from all your licensing entitlement that you have to assign to Azure. Then in regards to virtual machines, each virtual machine consumes at least 8 cores. At least. So if there's a 4-core VM, it still requires 8 cores in Azure. If it's bigger, then just add another 8 cores. The way it works, there are no 12-core VMs anyway. So I think it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, those sorts of increments. So in Azure, when you assign license to virtual machines, you always assign them in increments of 8. Microsoft in CSP specifically created 8-core packs for that simplification. So you assign licenses in the counts of 8. Still, a pack is not a license. It's a pack of 8 licenses. Right. 16-core pack can cover 2 VMs if they're less than 16 cores. So say you have 2 virtual machines, each 8 cores, you can assign one 16-core pack, because I remind you, it's not a single license. Editions of the virtual machines themselves don't matter, but by default, when you order a virtual machine in Azure, it's always Windows Server Datacentre. So, right. Now, moving on. Licensing access in Azure. So if you run Windows Server machines in a multi-tenant in the cloud environment in Azure, I'm not talking about dedicated hosts, Windows Server CALs are not required, but RDS client licenses, remote desktop client licenses, are required in Azure. So many people make that mistake. They think because Windows Server CALs are not required, RDS CALs are not required either. RDS CALs, remote desktop services CALs, are required in Azure. You may use your own CALs with software thresholds if you have them. You may buy them specifically for that. You may buy a subscription license. Or another option is, if you don't want to buy your own licenses and pay for SA, you can also rent them from any hosting provider, which is a SPLA provider. You can rent RDS SALs. It's an equivalent, it's a rental license, equivalent of the CAL. Funny enough, I was stunned. I read about it a couple of days ago, and I just couldn't get my head around it. I have a slide about it, one of those slides in this presentation, which I wanted to skip through, but I'll show you that. External RDS access to virtual machines in Azure is not permitted. Microsoft don't allow it. So you can't give external access to anyone except for the company that supports your service. That's the language they use there. Right. So what about non-Azure, like Amazon, Google, Alibaba? So why I'm listing these 4, including Azure as well, is they're so-called listed providers, and different rules apply to them when it comes to bringing your own licenses to those clouds. So Azure, in addition to hybrid benefit, you can also apply these rights. But in many cases, Azure hybrid benefit in Azure is better. So whether hardware is dedicated to your own use or you use virtual machines in a shared cloud environment, you can always opt for just pay as you go and pay Amazon monthly fees for the licenses without bringing your own licenses. If you want to bring your own licenses, you may not bring your own Windows Server licenses. You may not do that to a multi-tenant environment. You always have to pay for a Windows Server in a multi-tenant environment through pay-as-you-go. You have to. Unless it's Azure, as I explained to you. So in Azure, that's Azure Hyper-V. If it's dedicated hardware, then you may only bring your licenses that were purchased before 1st of October 2019, and you would have to prove it. Complicated. What about Windows Server in other service providers, not Alibaba? So a bit more relaxed. So again, if it's shared multi-tenant, only pay as you go. No bring your own license. It's an additional expense. But if it's dedicated hardware, then in this case, just it's free meal, free for all. Do whatever you want, because dedicated hardware in the provider is treated as your own hardware, just as if it was on premises, with one exception, which we'll get to. It's about the RDS cows, because and this is the slide basically. So 2 slides on this. So on providers, let's talk about Windows Server cow. If you pay as you go fees to provider, you don't need Windows Server cows. It's all included in the pay-as-you-go fee. Doesn't matter how many users you have. Nobody cares. You just pay pay-as-you-go fee for a virtual machine or a physical machine that you license through pay-as-you-go. If it's permitted to bring your own license, and you bring your own license to provider on a dedicated hardware, then Windows Server cows are required in that case, because, as I said, it's treated as if it was on premises. It's dedicated hardware. The only problem is with RDS cows. Is basically there's a lot of text on this slide. If I start reading it, it's going to be complicated. Let me switch to the next one. What they say is there are 2 conflicting points, and I'm trying to clarify it with Microsoft now. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for today with this. There are two conflicting bits here. So in first they say is that customer may only use their RDS user cows on dedicated hardware only if a provider is an authorized licensed mobility partner, which immediately cuts off about 80% of providers in the world, which is a very strange limitation because it doesn't apply to any other license according to the term that is at the bottom of the slide. So for those of you who are licensing geeks, take a screenshot now, smoke it, and then I would like you to come back to me somewhere on LinkedIn and let's discuss this, because my brain is completely fried by this. In one section they say one thing, and the other one they say different thing. I don't really get this. So I would say, to summarize this, be careful with RDS cows, any remote desktop solutions not on your premises, including Azure. Azure is simple. You can bring your own cows. But any other third-party providers, I think Microsoft is having an unfair advantage here because it's easier than Azure. But anyway, so careful with RDS cows. So there are CAL equivalents. What is a CAL equivalent? So some licenses in the Microsoft world and subscription licenses, including Microsoft 365, they give you a substitute, an equivalent for a CAL. Basically, let me try and explain this. I wasn't prepared. Let me try and explain this. If you have one of these licenses, you do not need Windows Server CAL. That's the easiest explanation. Because it sort of includes CAL in itself. So if all your users are covered with, say, Microsoft 365 E3, then none of these users require Windows Server CALs. Does it make sense? I like this comment from Karen, and it's absolutely true. When in doubt, when you're in doubt about any Microsoft licensing rules, always assume that the resolution will be the one that will bring Microsoft the most money. They always protect their income, and that's the way intellectual property works in the world anyway. So let's move on. I mean, this is going to be a long session. I'm sorry, we might overrun for more than 2 hours. I'm pretty sure we will. And in case if you have to drop off after 2 hours, come back and watch it, because I'll leave the recording on the channel. Moving on. So where are we? Color equivalence. There's a link as well in that slide, which that you can search in Microsoft product terms. Just search for color equivalence. It's easy. So software assurance considerations. When do you need software assurance? Why would you keep it? Why would you use it? What is the benefit to have active software assurance on Windows Server licenses? So firstly, the licensing benefits you get through software assurance. Firstly, Azure hybrid benefit only works when you have active software assurance. New version rights. That's the core benefit of software assurance. You can always, whilst you have software assurance active, you may always upgrade to any new released version. Semi-annual builds. You actually have to uninstall semi-annual builds if your software assurance expires. It's very important to know. If your licenses are no more covered with software assurance, you forgot or you decided not to renew, you have to uninstall semi-annual builds. Incremental builds. By the way, in the Windows Server 2022, there will be no more semi-annual builds as per Microsoft's news. But if you're running Windows 2019 with semi-annual builds, it still applies to them anyway. Take note that in Windows Server, you're probably already familiar with some of the Microsoft licensing rules. So in Windows Server, there's no license mobility except for external connect. So Windows Server does not benefit from license mobility at all. Neither license mobility in server farms nor license mobility through software assurance, which are actually two different rights. CALs, for you to benefit from software assurance, client access license must also have software assurance. So you may, if in some configuration you're required to have both Windows licenses, server licenses, and Windows Server CALs, unless exceptional circumstances like you're moving them to Azure, you must have active software assurance on both the server license and the CALs. Otherwise, if you just maintain software assurance on the server, you don't have these benefits. So that's an important note. Many people forget about it. So my recommendations is always have software assurance on CALs. I always recommend, when you have client access license, always buy them and maintain them with software assurance. Why? Because you can get non-compliant overnight. Somebody upgrades one server and then suddenly server's license. So with CALs, as I explained in the first part of this training, you have to have either the current versions of CALs or higher. So if you have CALs version 2016 and somebody upgrades to 2022 today, all your CALs have to be upgraded to 2022. When you have software assurance on them, on the client access license, they just upgrade it automatically. You don't need to think about it. That's why I always recommend have software assurance always active, always on client access licenses. Many headaches go away. Keep software assurance on Windows Server licenses if you are migrating to Azure, because it's cheaper to renew software assurance on an existing license than to pay for pay-as-you-go rates in Azure. It's a no-brainer. It's one of the things we have in our services. One of the big tick boxes when we help a customer to save money, to reduce money on the next enterprise agreement renewal. We tell them, are you moving to Azure? Are you already present in Azure? Then keep a say and maybe even buy more licenses with software assurance, because it's going to cost you less if you use them in Azure than continue paying pay-as-you-go rates in Azure. That's one of the savings points, important point. Yes, if you have external connector licenses, some classes obviously keep a say on external connectors. Otherwise, they won't be able to move together with the VMs, as I explained before. And to continue using semi-annual builds, you have to maintain the say. These are software assurance considerations. So this is why this training is called license management training, because I'm giving you license management tips here. CSP considerations. So the world is moving towards the new model. from enterprise agreement to CSP. So perpetual licenses, in CSP, there are two types of licenses, perpetual licenses and subscriptions for all the service. Perpetual licenses do not have SA benefits. You may not, basically, they're almost useless, to be honest. And Datacentre edition is not available. Software Assurance doesn't exist in CSP, but subscription licenses have SA equivalent rights, including Azure hybrid benefit. So subscription licenses are not licenses with software assurance. They're not software assurance licenses. But in CSP, they get the same rights, almost the same rights, but the core rights are there, as if it was a license with software assurance. So when you, basically, if you want static infrastructure, small business, no cloud, you may think about perpetual licenses through CSP. If you want to be flexible, modern, migrate to Azure, then buy subscription licenses. That's the. Can you hear me? By the way, I think you should hear me because I see my microphone is Olivia.
We can hear you, Alex. Don't worry about it. We can hear you.
Duke doesn't hear me, so probably something is with your computer. I'm sorry. So, Daryl, do you want to do the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just bring up my picture so people can actually see that I'm here. So,
as usual,
do you need a software assurance for Windows Server in virtual clusters so licenses could move along with the virtual machines? A, yes. B, no. Take a minute, read it carefully. The emphasis is on software assurance.
We are overrunning. I can predict we are overrunning by about 30 minutes. So I hope you'll stay with us because its session is packed with information. I actually did a poll on LinkedIn and on the community tab, and this service session got the highest rate as the most anticipated training session. Obviously, not
so
comparing
for those of you
the...
that have to jump off, if you've got a meeting or another engagement, then please do. It's been recorded. It's on the YouTube channel, as you can see, and you can always come back later and view what you missed. That's always an option.
So the answer here is no, but the answer here is a bit longer. I thought somebody would type it. So because there's no license mobility in server farms, therefore software assurance just doesn't make any difference. Licenses cannot move along. I told you it's a tricky question. I usually ask tricky questions. Daryl, as we are overrunning, I'll probably skip through the next question because that's a very long calculation. We'll go to System Center.
Yeah.
If you have a meeting or a call or something like that, what I suggest you doing is, you mute the speakers, you call that person, you join the meeting and say, sorry, I'm in a training, hang up and go back. That's my suggestion. When else you will have us live and be able to ask questions, and these trainings, we're only going to run these trainings maybe 1 or 2 more times, once a year, and then we might stop because it just doesn't make sense to do them all the time. So it's a unique opportunity. It's very exhausting as well, as you may imagine. System Center. So System Center is a product which lets you manage service. Therefore, we don't have cows here. We have managed licenses. The concept is access licenses, but they're just called managed licenses. So we have two realms here: management service, from which you manage, and managed service and clients, which you manage from the management server. Does it make sense? Do you follow? So management service are actually free of charge since 2010. Since version 2010, then Microsoft said, you know what, just pay for the managed endpoints. So you license managed service and managed clients endpoints, management endpoints. So managed service are licensed per core, like Windows Server, exactly the same formulas, but I'll get back to that. I'll just reiterate it. Managed clients are licensed either per user or per device, and same logic applies as per CALs. If you assign a device managed license, then it doesn't matter how many users use it. If you assign a user managed management license, then whichever devices that user uses may be used through that. Sorry, may be managed through that one single user management license. So that's it. So very similar to CAL. Current major version, and the reason I say major is there are incremental builds or semi-annual builds. They're named differently. Are they semi-annual? If you look at the numbers, so each number of the incremental build is consists of the year and the month. So 2107, 2103, that just means like 2021 March. So System Center which was a surprise for me because I don't sell licenses. A year ago, I was quite surprised to learn that System Center is only sold with software assurance. You can't buy System Center without software assurance. Since when, I don't know, but right now, only with the say. If you have contradiction information, I'd like to see that message in the chat. But as far as I check the price lists, System Center is always there only with software assurance.
It's always been like that, Alex. You must probably just didn't realize it. It's always been. It's very unique from the Windows family.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl. Because why I didn't care, I can explain if anyone cares. Is because when you optimize licenses, you don't really care much about software assurance on System Center, because also it has license mobility rights, but not in server farms. So in server farms, it's as static as Windows Server. So because there are no other benefits, and there used to be much less cloud than providers at the time. So there were very limited benefits of SA. That's why I didn't care. Now I started caring, and then I started paying attention to, you can only buy it with SA. So that's true. Thanks, Daryl. So I had my doubts. I don't have them anymore. Interestingly, it's not available in CSP. So if you need System Center, you have to buy it either through Enterprise Agreement or MPSA. I think also Open Value. I'm not sure, but I know that in Enterprise Agreement and in MPSA, you can buy System Center still. And by the way, watch out for MPSA, because Microsoft is cutting pieces off, taking stuff out of MPSA, basically just pinching stuff and removing it. So MPSA is becoming less and less attractive. Current server management license editions are similar to Windows Server. They're Data Center and Standard. There's no Essential. The Data Center and Standard, the core editions. There's also the same. I don't have a slide for it here, but the same down editioning rights apply. So you can down edition from Data Center to Standard. But that doesn't make any sense because there's no edition that you run. What essentially these licenses are is just a set of rights. Data Center provides you a bigger set of rights. Than Standard, and more VMs you can manage under Data Center license, unlimited number of VMs per host. As with Windows Server, same logic. So client management licenses, I have a couple of slides. I don't want to really spend so much time on client management license, but it's a big part of System Center, because System Center is also used to manage client endpoints, laptops, desktops, phones. So normally, if you look at the yellow letter B, what it means is it's sold as a bundle, in a bundle. And I have a slide with bundles a bit later on. What you need to notice here is almost all of them have either user option or either device or operating system option. So some of them are not really per device, some of them are per operating system environment. So be careful with that. What it means is a device license usually covers the entire device. OEC covers one operating system environment, one VM, one Hyper-V container, one container. So pay attention to what the metric says. If it says device, it's the entire device. If it says OEC, it's just one operating system environment. If somebody virtualizes something on desktops and they have a physical operating system, Windows 10, and virtual Windows 10, you need 2 licenses per OEC or 1 user license with unlimited number of OECs managed through that user. So although some of the standalone client management licenses not available in some channels as themselves, they are bundled with other software. So there are some indirect ways of acquiring the same license. Say in CSP, System Center Endpoint Protection 1606, very old version, but anyway, in CSP you can't just buy it. You can just go buy this license. But if you buy EMS, I think it's EMS, I have a slide about it, then it includes that right. So that's the way you acquire it through CSP. If you go to price list, or if you go to the Microsoft product terms and you see one of these components is missing in a specific licensing program, always also check all the equivalencies and bundles. It may be bought differently. More expensive, but there you go, there's a way. So just to remind you that management service are free of charge and management service are free of charge. Managed service, license per core, exactly like Windows Server. Absolutely, just the same thing. And then the server management license, when the server is properly licensed with management licenses, covers almost all, 99% System Center components on that server. So say you manage the same operating system with configuration manager, operations manager, data protection manager. It's all covered under one umbrella of a server management license. Any components. There's no breakdown. So very simplified way of managing servers. Same formulas. So let me skip through this because it's exactly the same what I explained for Windows Server. How you buy them? There are no 8 core packs, but the same rules apply to 2 core packs or 2 core packs or 16 core packs. Same thing. There's just packs of single core licenses. What about virtual machines and containers? Same as Windows Server. Exactly. Just exact copy. Datacenter gives you unlimited virtualization rights. Standard edition gives you up to 2 of the following virtual machines plus containers with Hyper-V isolation. Do not count containers without Hyper-V isolation, so-called Windows Server containers. So I need to introduce to you some of the absolutely bonkers Microsoft terminology. Look at this. So I went to product terms and System Center just to clarify. Always before this training, I clarify my knowledge just to make sure I'm not talking bollocks. Windows Server. So when I went to System Center, this is the only the upper part of the upper screenshot. This is the only mention of containers on the System Center page in product terms. And they say Windows Server containers, customer may manage any number of OSCs instantiated as Windows Server containers on the license server. And I thought, wait a second. So all the containers, unlike Windows Server licenses, all the containers can be licensed can just manage as an unlimited number of OSCs. And we don't have to count them. Any containers, even including Hyper-V isolated containers. That was my fault. I was baffled because what Microsoft is trying to do since about 2016 is the licensing models for Windows Server System Center are exactly synchronized. And these looked like, wait a second, why do I need to count Hyper-V containers for Windows Server and I don't need to count them for System Center? I actually do, because then I went to this FAQ, second screenshot, and that's the clarification. So basically, what Microsoft calls Windows Server containers is what it used to call containers without Hyper-V isolation. It's just a very messed up terminology. So don't get caught by that, please. Just remember, the easiest way to remember this is that the System Center licensing on the servers is exactly the same as Windows Server. Right, same stacking. If you need more than 2 VMs, just stack licenses. If you need to manage 2 VMs, one caveat here. Actually, let me switch to the next slide because it's in the first row on this slide, the first line on this slide. Count only operating system environments with System Center components. What can happen on a host is that, and it happens everywhere, a host runs 16 virtual machines. So for the purposes of counting virtual machines for Windows Server, you count all 16 Windows Server machines. But for the purposes of System Center, you only count those virtual machines. that have at least one system sensor agent or managed by system sensor anyhow. And this number could be 1. Amongst all the 16 virtual machines on the host, only 1 requires a management license. Therefore, pay attention to that. Usually, the number of system sensor licenses that is required in virtualized environments, usually, unless you have a policy requiring you to install system sensor agents and manage everything with system sensor. We have customers like that. Unless you have that policy and you just randomly manage a small number of virtual machines, do not put an equal sign between the number of Windows Server licenses required and system center licenses required, because you'll require fewer system center licenses in that case. But then otherwise the formulas are exactly the same as for Windows Server. You just count the license, the VMs that have system center component. Please click like. I need to top up my bottle. Daniel, you want to take over for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So you just take a break. Happy to take any questions at this time. If anybody wants to ask anything, any specifics around software license serving. Anybody want to just ask anything? You're very quiet team. So let's just talk a bit about the commercial side until Alex gets back and takes a few minutes off. So on this,
I'll wait until you finish. I need a few minutes break.
No, you take a few minutes. I'm just going to take. I just want to talk a bit about the commercial side. So just share with you what we're seeing as part of our experience on server licensing, let's say versus desktop licensing. So what we're seeing is that there's a drop in, let's call it, the complexity and the relevance of day-to-day management of the desktop, where the server side has taken a much more a more strategic part of the software asset management cycle of Microsoft, where what we're seeing is Windows Server, SQL Server are really the 2 dominant products today that organizations are dealing with. And not only that, when you look at the financial aspects of cloud migration, ultimately servers, Windows and SQL servers with the Azure hybrid benefits is the most crucial part of that migration. And I think that's really where the team, the participants on this training come into play, and the importance of the role takes place, is to do that financial planning. And by understanding what we're going through today on the server side, the licensing on Windows, and we'll talk about SQL Server as well, that's where, if you're able to close that financial gap, that's your contribution to that digital transformation or cloud migration process. And it's getting to be much more crucial than before. Now, I've been asked multiple times around, well, why do I actually have to remember this or learn server-side licensing? There are multiple tools out there that we can log into, we can use. They are available over the cloud. There's Microsoft SCCM, and so on and so on. Ultimately, none of these tools, and I've got a lot of respect to them, none of them can do the human side of optimization. They can give you the raw data at a good level if you've deployed them correctly, but you need to interpret them. I would never, okay, and I'm going to say this out loud, tool vendors might not like it, I would never take the output, the optimization output of any tool as a fact. There are so many variants that you've heard from Alex over the last hour and a half almost that come into play, that ultimately, 1, you're going to be leaving money on the table. 2, potentially you're going to be at a compliance risk. So the human factor is still crucial to managing the server side. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Daryl. That's very correct. Yes, indeed. If desktop licensing is not becoming easier, but you may use certain scenarios of licensing which make it really easy. Say Microsoft 365. If you are happy to pay for full packages for every user, then it becomes extremely simple. It even a bit simplifies client access licenses on the server side. But in regards to servers themselves, now we have bring your own license. Now we have SPLA providers. Now we have Azure and Azure hybrid benefit. And it just suddenly got out of control. And look at what the mess that Microsoft did with RDS cows. Or I'm going to show you, so just a couple of slides. So rule of 90 days, same as for Windows 7, no licensability in server farms. Licenses are attached to hosts for 90 days. So you need to basically follow the same rules of either assign Datacentre for unlimited virtualization, or think about how if you want to stack standard licenses, same caveats apply. I don't remember the ratio with System Center. I think it's also about like 1:4, 1:3. So in System Center, Datacentre starts making sense much earlier than with Windows Server license. But the next slide is I made a post tonight on LinkedIn, and Chris Wong from Canada, he came to me and sent me a few guides and helped me to move a bit along this research of how do I assign System Center to Azure. And you can see this is the only thing I found. So may you bring it to Azure? Yes, you may, but it seems, judging by what's on this slide, that you may also bring System Center to Azure to host dedicated to your use. So may you use Windows Server System Center, your own licenses with software assurance, having license mobility through SA, right? May you use them in a third-party data center on Azure? It seems like the only explicit permission is given to dedicated hardware. Multi-tenant? No. I don't see it here. We had an argument with Chris. We decided to agree to disagree, but from my point of view, no. I'll pick this question from Ravi. Ravi, this is a question for the 8th session where I'm going to be talking about development, but it's a good one. It's well timed. Do we count the development virtual machines within a host for Windows Server licensing when licensing a host which has a mix of both production and development virtual machines? I actually have a video about it on this channel because it's one of the very painful questions, and there are lots of wrong interpretations of this. Microsoft only clarified it in about 2019. So no. As long as you count every user, developer, tester, admin, whatnot, and license them with MSDN, user of those non-production VMs, they must be licensed somehow. So how do you license non-production? With MSDN, Visual Studio with MSDN or MSDN platforms. So as long as all the users that even touch those VMs are covered with MSDN, except for user acceptance testing. As I said, it's a very long. We have a specific training about it, 2-hour training just about development. No, then in that case, you don't need to count them. Do not count them. Exclude them. You may mix production and non-production virtual machines on the host. The operating system of the host must be licensed as production. That really doesn't matter when you have VMware, but when you have Windows Server, then you must remember that the operating system of the server then must be licensed as production, even if you have one production VM. But even when you run a mix, that mix does not affect the non-production VMs. It's a very important thing to understand because it may be make it or break it in an audit. So if you have any doubts, come to me. If you have anyone telling you otherwise, send them to me. I'll have a chat with them, a serious one. Do you want to argue with the Russian? Anyway, so System Center server management license in Alibaba, Google, Amazon dedicated hardware. Remember, I've just shown you dedicated hardware. So universal licensing terms apply. You may only bring your own licenses either without a say, but the licenses that were purchased before 1st of October 2019, talking about complexity of server licensing. Or you may bring licenses with software assurance, provided that the provider, provided that the provider is a licensed mobility partner, is an authorized licensed mobility partner. I'm sure these three clouds are authorized licensed mobility partners. I'm pretty sure they are. As far as I know, none of them is a QMTH, but that's a different thing, so don't think about it right now. And then the formulas in the previous slide apply. These formulas, how you license. Pay attention, by the way, that there's no unlimited virtualization in when you bring your licenses to cloud. Yeah, and it's completely differently calculated, just entirely differently calculated. 10 managed OECs per 16 core licenses. You can stack them as well. Right, software assurance considerations for Windows Server. This is a bit of license management, so not to screw up your estate and not to become non-compliant. Licensing benefits that you get with System Sensor. License mobility through SA. So there are two rights called license mobility in Windows, in Microsoft licensing. License mobility in server farms is a right allowing a license to move across servers in a farm. License mobility through SA, I didn't create this confusion, I'm sorry for Microsoft, is a right letting you to take your license and bring it to a third-party provider. So System Center doesn't get license mobility in server farms, but it gets license mobility through SA. Obviously new version rights, obviously semi-annual or incremental builds. As I said, you cannot buy a license without software assurance considerations. Why would you consider software assurance? It's because SA may expire, and you may end up with license without SA, and thus lose all these benefits. Because as long as SA expires, you just lose all these benefits. You cannot, you may not take this license anymore to a third party. You may not use semi-annual builds. So keep SA if you need, bring your own license, and if you need semi-annual builds. Not many benefits really, not many. Right. Hi, Alexei. Hello, brother. CSP considerations. So server management licenses are not available in CSP. Standalone client MLs also not available. But some client management licenses are available in CSP through the following bundles: either Core or Enterprise CAL, EMS, or Microsoft 365, including academic plans. So that's how you buy client management license through CSP. You buy one of those bundles. Check the details on product terms, but the bundles are very, very, very well detailed. Right. A question.
Yeah, Alex, you take a break. So let's just read through this together. Do you need licenses for System Center management servers? Again, do you need licenses for System Center management servers? Yes, A, B, no. C, it's complicated.
It's C, sorry, it's not A. That's my mistake.
It's okay. On the fly, I corrected it.
Mm.
Did you get a cup of tea, Alex? Something just to help you get through the next...
No, I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm drinking my water. It's the second bottle already. Wonderful bottle, by the way. So no product placement. I just like that I drink it like this. I don't have to tip it.
Good.
My wife's present.
That's a good present.
Yeah, thanks.
How's the computer doing? Is it warming up, or how's it functioning today?
It's spinning the fans very, very fast. I don't know if you probably can't hear this noise because Restream does a very, very good job processing audio on the fly. I don't know how they do this, but I mean, obviously I have a professional audio chain here, but I also use some of the Restream's options to add additional touch on top of that. And one of those touches is it actually takes away all the background noise. It's amazing.
No, it sounds great. You can't hear anything.
The answer is B, obviously.
Good.
Yeah, but Steven gave a very good answer. Yes, you need Windows Server licenses. That's what I wanted to see. But the correct answer is, well, just for System Center itself, no, you don't. But that's something that, yeah, Steven, very well.
Good job.
Right. Core infrastructure suite. I can cover this section very quickly. Core infrastructure suite, basically Windows Server and System Center glued together in one license. That's it. That is it. Same rules apply to the quantity of required licenses. Same rules apply to virtualization. So, you know what? I'll just flick through this very quickly. So, same rules. Yeah, let me go back to the discount because I didn't say about discount. So 5%, you get 5% just if you buy it as a bundle. You get 15% if you buy them part 2 of the training enterprise agreement. If you buy them through server and cloud enrollment and make them platform products, then it gives you 15% discount. If you add System Center and Windows Server in a core infrastructure service suite, buy through NSC, you get 15% reduction of the total cost of these two products. May not be always, so still detailed analysis is recommended because it may not be always actually an economical solution. It depends on how your infrastructure is configured. If you're not using System Center everywhere, this may not be a cheaper solution. Right. Same rules. I'll just say same rules and move on to the next slide. So because System Center is not available on CSP, core infrastructure server either is not available in CSP. It's also this is another effect of a System Center. It's only sold with software assurance, but software assurance may expire, so you may end up with core infrastructure service suite licenses without software assurance easily. Sold in 2 and 16 core packs. There are no 8 core packs. Well, same rules apply again. Azure Hybrid Benefit is tricky. Why? Basically, for the Windows Server component, yeah, it works. For System Center, it doesn't. So if you think about, okay, fine, I didn't buy Windows Server license for my estate. I bought core infrastructure service suite license for my estate. May I benefit from Azure Hybrid Benefit? Yes. Just count those core infrastructure service suite licenses as if they were Windows Server license. I don't know how to make it simpler. It's really simple. So same rules for Azure Hybrid Benefit, same calculations as for Windows Server. As I said, that's just a bundle, just 2 products made in one bundle. Other off-premise use, like a third party, the same as Windows Server, just refer to Windows Server. Client access, Windows Server counts, same as Windows Server. So client license to those services, Windows Server counts. I'm not sure if Daryl disconnected and reconnected. Anyway, SQL Server. So software assurance considerations the same. As I said, same as Windows Server in the majority of cases. So CIS is easy to understand as long as you know Windows Server and System Center. SQL Server. This is the most anticipated, according to all the polls that I did, part of this training. And I have a question for you, which you then again can answer in the background. I'll keep watching, what versions pop up. Right, Daryl, I'll brought you back. So turn yourself on when you need it.
Good, thank you.
Right. So what's the oldest version of SQL Server that runs in your estate right now? Because I've last time what I saw is SQL 2000. Wow. You can't even virtualize it. I mean, people do virtualize it, but strictly speaking, it's not permitted. It's permitted through a higher version license, though. So you can't virtualize a license. You can't virtualize an instance. SQL Server has a choice of licensing models. You either license it, so it's almost like if you think about Oracle database, you have processors and you have NUPs, name user plus license. The only problem is that it's different to Oracle because NUPs, you still need to count the minimum per processor. So processors affect the number of NUPs in Oracle. In the Microsoft world, no. You just count the users. But when you choose server cal model or server plus cal, I like calling it server plus cal, you still have to license this server itself, which doesn't exist in the Oracle world. This was my simple comparison of Oracle and SQL Server database licensing. Welcome. In the server cal model, you have the following choices of editions. So SQL Server Standard, current, and previous versions. SQL BI was discontinued, I think, in 2014 or 2016. But you may still have the licenses, and they were with SQL Server BI client access licenses. And SQL Server Enterprise versions less than 2012. But please pay attention to that. Many organizations I deal with, almost all of them, continue renewing software assurance on SQL Enterprise licenses in the server cal model that they bought in 2005. They continued to renew software assurance. Thus, they now have rights to run SQL Server Enterprise 2019 under this model. You can't buy it anymore like this. So if you go now to resell and say, I want to buy SQL Server Enterprise in the server cal model, they're not available since 2014. That model just doesn't exist anymore as a new license. But as I said, if you continue to maintain software assurance, never interrupted it, you have a right to use, there are technical limitations, but you have a right to use SQL Server Enterprise 2019 under this model, as long as it has been covered with active software assurance. It's an inheritance. If you inherited it through software assurance, then you can do that. Otherwise, so SQL Standard has a choice. Now, if you go and buy a new license, you may either opt for server cal or core. If you now buy a new enterprise license, you may only buy it per core. That's your only choice. SQL BI, as I said, business intelligence was discontinued. Current version of SQL Server is 2019, previous versions are 2017, 2016, 2014, 2012 R2, 2012, 2008 R2, 2008, 2005, 2000, and then 7.6, 4.2, anyway, a lot. So I even remember SQL version 4, I think. My first SQL Server that I really liked was SQL Server 2000, and then in 2005, Microsoft screwed it up a bit, but not the server itself. Server was great, but the management tools were bloated. Current editions are only enterprise and standard. There used to be different editions. So these are the down edition and the right. So downgrades are allowed to any version through volume licensing and CSP. Editions work like this. So enterprise can be down edition to anything previous, anything. Standard can only be or may only be down edition to SQL Server Workgroup. I don't remember what was the last SQL Server Workgroup. I think it was SQL Server Workgroup 2005 or SQL Server Small Business. Interestingly enough, so this is an interesting one. So if you downgrade, if you run SQL Server BI under SQL Server Enterprise Core license, all the rules of SQL Server Enterprise Core apply to that BI instance, how it's licensed. Because rights and rules are always inherited from the license you assigned, not the version or edition you're running, from the license you assigned. So it's a bit tricky. I hope you understand it. So Ravi said SQL Server 2000, and I have to confirm that this is not at all a rare situation. So that's the oldest version in the estate. Right. Access. When you license SQL Server per core, you do not need cals, because I said it's a choice, either server plus cal or per core. Per core licenses do not require licensing access. Access there is unlimited. When it comes to server plus cal model, and you may choose server plus cal model, and one I dealt with a customer, they're no more my client, it was in my previous job. I had a client where they just went for lots of cals because it was cheaper for them. Everybody in the organization required a CAL. They only used SQL Server Standard, and they calculated that actually that solution was good for them. The only caveat is when you need to publish anything to the outside world, because you can't really count how many people are on the internet. But then you must use some sort of core licenses on that, internet-facing instance. I hope you can hear me, because my voice is a bit softer now.
No, we can hear you fine, Alex. You're talking softly. You can hear you crystal clear.
That's good. Thank you, Dario. I'm talking your way, like you teach in your negotiation presentations. By the way, if anybody's interested in negotiations, we already have 4 or 5 training sessions on this channel about how to negotiate, not just with Microsoft, just negotiate your next salary. So watch them, by the way. Really interesting. So just go to the channel's homepage, scroll almost to the bottom, and there's a like a negotiations masterclass playlist. So access SQL Server CAL, please remember this, because I've seen mistakes made. People not understanding this. Access is always licensable in this model. There are no external connectors. If you want external connector equivalents, use the per core model. CALs are never bundled. So the mistakes I've seen is people would buy companies. Oh, well, I mean, when I say companies would buy, people in those companies would procure CAL bundles, core CAL bundle, if you know what it is, enterprise CAL bundle. It's like a package of multiple CALs. And then they thought that SQL CAL is included in the bundles. SQL Server CAL is always standalone. It's never bundled. There are no equivalencies. There's nothing. And as I said, if you want unlimited users, go per core. Don't choose this model. This model works well when you have, say, a solution that is an accounting software that is only used by 10 users. Or, I don't know, some other financial solution used by 20 traders, something like that. That's when this model is very feasible. Please remember as well, so I don't have a slide about multiplexing because I covered multiplexing in my first part, that you need to license the endpoints. So if you have, say, a server, SQL Server, you have 10 kiosks, and these 10 kiosks are used by 1,000 people in the organization. What I would do, you need to choose what's the cheapest endpoint here, because this is not really multiplexing. In this case, I would choose 10 SQL Server device CALs for those kiosks, because it's a perfectly feasible solution. But what the discussions I used to have, I don't have them anymore, but I used to have with various license managers in organizations and procurement people. We have a web server, and we have a database, and web server maintains 2 connections to the database, and there's only one web server, one database. How many CALs do I need to buy? 1 or 2? And the answer here is, well, you have to go to per core, because you don't license this server, because then people and other devices access that server. You need to license those people and those devices. And if it's a web server, obviously it's not 1 CAL. If it's a web server, you have to go with the per core model. Whatever you have in the middle, connection pooling, reducing the number of required connections, does not reduce the number of licenses required. Please remember that CALs are assigned to the end consumer. You may choose it either to be users or devices, but they must be endpoints and consumers, not middle tier, never middle tier. There's an interesting slide here about the number of permitted instances under various editions and the way you license them. And I'd like to spend some time trying to explain it to you. So when it's a server plus CAL model, the number of permitted instances is different to per core model. So you need to remember these rules for server plus CAL model and per core model. Almost treat them as separate products. SQL Server Server CAL and SQL Server per core. Treat them as different products. So if you're licensing a physical server with SQL Server Standard server core license, or you're licensing virtual machines, you can only run one instance per license. So you may have heard, and I talk about it often, that SQL Server allows you to run unlimited instances in one operating system environment. That only applies to per core. When you use standard licenses, you may only license one instance with one license. So if you run 10 instances and you use server cal model, you must assign more licenses to cover every single instance in that case. When you use enterprise licenses, so one enterprise license covers up to 4 operating system environments, physical and virtual. And in those operating system environments, then you may use unlimited number of instances. So you need to count operating system environments per each enterprise license, and there's no differences either whether say or not. And Microsoft put technical limits on the server cal licensing model with SQL Server Enterprise, and they are tricky. So when your server doesn't has hyper-threading switched off, there's always just a limit of 20 cores. And basically what I say to customers is if your server physically more than 20 cores, if it has more than 20 cores, then I wouldn't consider assigning SQL Server Enterprise server cal to that server. Just wouldn't, because how do you prove to Microsoft as auditors that you're not using more than 20 cores? Especially at the hardware level, there's no argument. You may not use more than 20 cores. But with virtual machines, it's tricky. So all the virtual machines with SQL Server instances, in this case, must not consume more than 20 hardware threads. What it means is your limit of 20 cores suddenly becomes 10 cores if you turn hyper-threading on. Microsoft is making this very infeasible. I mean, potentially, if you have a server with 10-core server, even with hyper-threading, you don't have to worry. So as long as your server itself is less than this, fine. If it's a bigger server, I wouldn't even go this way. I wouldn't even consider this. And this is the first slide where I have this caveat in writing. If a license version is before 2019, 2016, 2014, whatnot, check the rules that apply to that version. They were different. SQL Server licensing evolves from version to version, sometimes drastically. So what I'm explaining here is SQL Server 2019. If you have 2017, maybe the difference is not that big. If you have SQL Server 2014 or 2012, the difference will be bigger. So, for example, SQL Server 2012 and 2014 used to have core factor tables which discounted AMD processors, 6-core AMD processors, just one series, 6-core AMD processors. But they were discounted. No more from SQL Server 2017. It just doesn't. 2016. The core factor table is removed. But if you use the old license and you run an old instance, then core factors still apply to you. Check previous. Check the product terms that apply to that version. So per core, number of instances, under standard license. If you're licensing physical cores at the server with standard, you may only run SQL Server Standard in the physical operating system, not virtualized. And the number of instances that you can run there is unlimited. If you're licensing virtual machines, the number of instances is unlimited. With enterprise, it's a bit tricky. So with enterprise, if you have software assurance on the SQL Server Enterprise cores, the virtualization is unlimited. Like as I said, just free ride. You know how many SQLs if you want to run on that server, as long as you license all the physical cores, you may run as many as you want. If it doesn't have software assurance, then you need to count the number of core licenses assigned and your number of operating system environments with SQL Server, including any containers. In this case, all containers. You need to count all containers. Hyper-V, non-Hyper-V, Docker, Kubernetes, if you know what I'm talking about. You have to count them all. Then in that case, you may not run more than 20 of those operating system environments, including containers, in the count. So not 20, no more than the number of licenses, core SQL Server Enterprise licenses that you assign to the server. If you want more virtual machines, more containers with SQL, you just assign more core licenses to that server. It's much easier to just continue maintaining software assurance and forget about this nightmare of counting cores. We have a question from Steven. I found recently this customer, they had maintained software assurance. I'll put it on screen. On the Enterprise plus CAL license, but they had upgraded servers that now fell for the following condition. What is this condition? Server 2019 Enterprise Edition software license on the Server plus CAL model is intended and physically limited to only around the server, but the total of 20 costs. Yeah, that's the one that I just explained. It's, I don't know where you took this quote from, probably from the white paper or the licensing guide, but it's very much correct. That's unfortunately it's technically limited as well. It just won't run. It's a sad story, but that happens. You know why? Because any changes in IT should be planned, including licensing, but very few people and companies do that. Okay, so the boring bit off. So let's get back to calculating core licenses. So how do you calculate core licenses for SQL Server? When you license, so you may either license physical layer or you may license virtual machines. You still assign licenses to the host, but you calculate license per virtual machine. How? So first slide is about physical servers. Number one, count physical CPUs, count physical cores in one CPU, and assign at least 4 licenses per CPU. It's very simple. And there's a formula. There's no server minimum as in Windows Server. There's only processor minimum. In the current circumstances, in the current modern server world, you will never assign less than 4, even by mistake, because processors are larger. But if you have legacy servers, please remember that even if you have 1 core processors, you still need at least 4 licenses per processor. License virtual machines and containers. So what you need to do, this is a bit perverted. Please bear with me. You need to count virtual CPUs, but you also need to count how many hardware threads are mapped to each virtual CPU. So in normal virtual machines, in VMware and Hyper-V, I asked engineers multiple times, and I was told, I was assured that Hyper-V and VMware in normal circumstances only support configurations when one vCPU is supported by 1 hardware thread. So really hyper threading does not affect a number of required licenses for SQL Server. But I'm not so sure about containers. If your container technology allows you to create vCPUs supported by more than 1 thread at the hardware level, then you actually need to count threads. Hyperthreads. At least 4 licenses per virtual machine. That's a very simple rule. Very simple rule. And in the simplified world, with just basic virtualization, the formula will be equals max, opening the parenthesis, 4, vCPU. How you purchase them? 2 core packs. 1 2-core pack has 2 licenses in it. Very simple. You will never argue with anyone about if they breakable or not, because cores are always incremented by 2. I've seen 5-core virtual machines though. I have. You can actually assign 5 cores if you want to. So you don't have to assign 6. If it's a 5-core, if there's a 5-core VM and a 3-core virtual machine side by side, basically what the 5 one would consume 5, cores, but the 3-core one will consume 4. Remember, there's a minimum of 4. And one core license will be wasted. I don't know if that was the actual number of cores, but that's how Snow reported it from the inventory. So shall we trust it? Reassigning licenses. So a rule of 90 days. This is the first product in today's training where we're not talking about license mobility in server farms. Software assurance gives license mobility in server farms to well, I already told that about external connectors for Windows Server, but SQL Server is more important. Software assurance gives the right to reassign licenses in real time from a host to a host. So if virtual machine is moving around the cluster or multiple server farms in one data center, the license follows. And actually, logically, you don't assign a license to a virtual machine, but when you have a license with software assurance, this is a bit of a license management advice. When you have license with software assurance and your tool can alert you when it say expires, you can actually assign licenses for SQL Server software assurance to a virtual machine inside Snow, Flexera, SPLA, those tools. That's what I do, but you need some sort of alerting because, for instance, Snow doesn't track if SA expires, and it may expire, and I might still continue thinking that SQL Server is licensed, but it is not already. So be careful with that. So you need a tool that gives you that sort of alerting, tells you when SA expires, or even maybe is capable of unassigning a license when SA expires. That would be ideal. There's Azure hybrid benefit for SQL Server as well. So regardless of the edition, there's no dual use right. There's only either or Azure or on premise, and again 180 days allowance for simultaneous use during one-way migration to Azure, not backwards. You can't do that. So. How to calculate licenses for SQL Server and Azure, I will explain to you in a few slides. I messed up the order of slides a little bit. We're now going to dive in SQL Failover. So SQL Failover is an interesting ride. So as long as your licenses are covered with software assurance, again, software assurance is required in this case, you can have up to 3 additional, it used to be 1, then in SQL Server 2017, it became 2, now 3. So remember, check the version, and it's right. It used to be just 1. You can have up to 3 disaster recovery at high availability failover instances of SQL Server. So 1 instance, only in this configuration. 1 instance for high availability clustering. 1 instance for disaster recovery in Azure only. No other providers, no other locations. And 1 instance for disaster recovery on a dedicated hardware. So 1 HA, 1 high availability instance anywhere, usually in the same cluster. And then you can have 2 manual disaster recovery. When I say manual, I mean when something happens to the main node, you have to manually run the other one. It cannot be automated anyhow. It's very important. But 1 you can have in Azure, and 1 you can have somewhere else on dedicated hardware, not shared. So that right does not apply to multi-tenant environments. They have their own SQL failover rights, which are different. Software assurance is required, including CALs if you're using server CAL model, very importantly. Mostly in my clients, they use core licenses with SA, so it makes it a bit simpler. You don't have to track if you still have software assurance on CALs. CSP subscription licenses, if you remember CSP, there's no software assurance, and then because I say software assurance is required, CSP subscription licenses have SQL failover rights, equivalent of software assurance. Another caveat is that the reserve instances, those high availability and disaster recovery instances, they may not require more licenses than the main one. What it means is, if the main one needs 20 cores to be licensed, reserved instance may not require 22 cores to be licensed. It must be either 20 or fewer. Usually advise my clients to have similar number of required cores in these configurations. So, all these doubts just go away. Just a similar number. Maintain a similar number. Like to like. What's important as well is SQL Failover instances, those reserved instances, they may not run normal SQL Server workloads. So they may not serve data to users. You may not do SQL reporting from them. You may not do SQL Server analysis on them. All they can do is either database consistency checks or backups or monitoring resource usage. That is it. It used to be, again, check the version. It used to be harsher. I think SQL Server 2016, I may be wrong, 2014 for certain, 2012 absolutely certain. You couldn't even run backups from reserved instances. So this is actually a relaxation of the rules with the recent versions of SQL Server. Microsoft, by the way, Microsoft is bringing more and more relaxations to SQL Server with each version. No more limitations, more relaxations. So going back to Azure hybrid benefits, sorry, so I messed up a bit order of slides. SQL Server in Azure exists in two versions, basically. One is infrastructure as a service, when you have full virtual machine, like on-premises virtual machine within the server, in which you either install SQL Server yourself or you buy it from Azure Marketplace. It looks just like a normal server. You manage and maintain it yourself. It's your SQL Server. There's another option, which is PaaS. Even actually two options on the platform as a service, where you have a managed SQL Server instance. So you have full instance, which is yours, but you don't maintain the server itself and the operating system. Microsoft does it for you, but it's your instance. And there's another one which is called SQL Server Database, where you only have access not to the whole instance, but only to one database on an instance. So when you have a managed instance, then you have multiple. You can create your own database. It's your full SQL Server instance. When it's a database, it's a database. So Azure Hybrid Benefit works in both and very similar. So how do you calculate licenses? You need minimum of 4 cores, like with virtual machines. See, this is a continuation of the virtual machine rule. Minimum 4 cores per PaaS virtual machine or IaaS instance. If you have a bigger instance or virtual machine, just assign more cores. But remember that there's a minimum of 4. What is unique to Azure compared to any other bring your own license, even on-premises license, is that the cross-edition assignment is possible. And not only you can assign enterprise licenses to a standard instance, you can also assign standard license to an enterprise instance, and with huge discounts. SQL Enterprise gives you unlimited virtualization on dedicated host, but I covered it better in more detail in the third part of the training. So here's an example. So you have a SQL Server Enterprise virtual machine. In a virtual machine, that's your instance that you configured, infrastructure as a service. You may either, and this is an 8-core instance, you may either assign just 1-to-1, 8 SQL Server Enterprise licenses, 1-to-1, but you may also assign 32 SQL Server standard licenses to it, just using multiplication of 4. How great is that? I think it's great. I think it's another unfair advantage that Microsoft created for Azure. With SQL Server Standard, it works backwards. So either you assign 1-to-1 standard licenses, or you assign enterprise licenses divided by 4. Which is actually, in this particular case, because of how they're priced, the enterprise license will be slightly cheaper. You're welcome. With IaaS, so PaaS, platform as a service, there are 3 types of services. So general purpose, hyperscale, and business critical. What you need to remember is general purpose and hyperscale, these 2 options, they are equal to SQL Server Standard. Same rules apply then. Business critical equals SQL Server Enterprise. Same rules apply then. As for SQL Server Enterprise. So very simple. If you assign SQL Server Enterprise licenses to dedicated hosts in Azure, the same rules apply as for on-premise. So whatever I told you about assigning license to the physical layer apply to dedicated Azure hosts as well, including Azure VMware solutions. What about Amazon, Google, Alibaba, and Azure in addition to Azure Hybrid Benefits? So obviously, in all of these providers, you have an option of pay-as-you-go, whether undedicated to or shared hardware, and bring your own license on is a bit complicated. So if you bought a license before 1st of October 2019, you may only bring it. You may bring it to one of those providers without limitations, no SA required. If it's a more recent license, more recently purchased license, then you need software assurance. You need to make sure the provider is a license mobility partner, and you have to fill in license verification forms. So there are specific terms about license mobility through SA on how you can bring your license to the provider. Any other service providers, not these big four providers, a bit simpler. So obviously, then again, pay-as-you-go option is available for any configuration. If hardware is dedicated to your own use, you may bring your own license. Software assurance is not required. It's an option for you. It's treated as on-premises. But if it's in a shared infrastructure, again, provider must be a license mobility partner, and you must do all these things with filling in license verification forms, sending them back to Microsoft, requesting them back. Microsoft signs them off. You give it to the provider, and provider says, "Fine, can bring it to my premises." Access SQL Server. So it really depends on how SQL Server is licensed. So if you license it per core, CALs are not required. Simple as that. If you license it per server plus CAL, or in providers, if you choose the pay-as-you-go option, it's going to be called SALs, subscriber access licenses. Usually just pay a fee. It's not even a license really for you. It's just a fee that you pay to the provider, because provider is responsible for your licenses. So in pay-as-you-go, SAL licenses, supply equivalent of CALs. And by the way, in pay-as-you-go, you do not pay for the servers themselves, server licenses. You may actually consider that as one of, if you're outsourcing something if you host it somewhere else, and your preferred model is server plus CAL, then actually SAL option may be even cheaper. So look at that. Do some comparisons. Play with the numbers. We can do it for you. And if you bring your own license, then in that case, CALs are required like on premises. There's no difference, because if hardware is dedicated to you, if that's permitted in that provider, then CALs are obviously required. Software assurance considerations. After the boring slides, fun one. So lots of benefits of software assurance for SQL Server. Azure Hybrid Benefit is one, but the one that I always preached was SQL Failover. Since SQL Server 2012. So in SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2, failover was built in, didn't require software assurance. Since SQL Server 2012, 1st of April 2012, Microsoft said, now, you know what, we require you to have software assurance on SQL Server licenses to get to benefit from the SQL Server failover free instance. At that time, 1. Now 3, as I've demonstrated. Then you need it for license mobility in server farms. Remember, virtualizing in clusters, you almost always need that software assurance, so the license could travel together with the virtual machine. And then license mobility through software assurance if you want to bring your licenses to a third-party cloud provider, hosting provider. And note that if you're choosing the server CAL model, as usual, CALs must also have software assurance. So recommendations are have software assurance on CALs, as I already told that. I don't want to go to that rabbit hole again. Keep a safe migrating to Azure. Keep a safe you need SQL failover. Keep a safe. Keep an eye on that. That doesn't expire, and renew it day to day. Because if you have a gap, you can't renew it. For VM mobility in clusters, basically, to be honest, in the majority of cases, when it's virtualized, you will need a safe. Because yes, that's an OpEx. That's something you pay as an ongoing maintenance. In the big long-term scheme of things, it's a cheaper solution and easier to maintain and fewer risks in terms of compliance. CSP considerations. Perpetual licenses do not have a say. Benefits, no license mobility, no SQL failover, and software assurance does not exist in CSP. Subscription licenses have full SA equivalent rights, including Azure Hybrid benefit, including SQL failover. So if you want that through CSP, take subscriptions. When it comes to, this is a slide from, we have a presentation here on this channel, how to optimize, it's called SQL Server licensing and cost optimization. We're talking about optimization. One of the things we always find is that in the majority of cases, unlimited virtualization is more expensive than per VM licensing. And this is an example, and it's an extreme example. Actually, usually virtual machines run on about 4 virtual cores on average in these states of our clients. And in that case, per VM license would have been what, 270K as opposed to almost 1 million. So if you're going after unlimited virtualization, make sure you sit down and do this calculation. Discounting all the developer edition, passive instances, virtual machines without SQL Server. What it makes sense is when you have a heavily packed SQL Server Enterprise farm. If that's your requirement, then there's another consideration which we have at that live. Very few instances there are where you actually need SQL Server Enterprise. Check the feature sets of Enterprise standard. You will see it for yourselves. Dario, I hope you're still there.
Yes, I am. I'm monitoring you, so let me go and take this question.
I have heavily overrun. We have Office service, but that's a quick one. That's going to be a very quick one.
Not a problem. Can you assign standard licenses to a SQL Enterprise virtual machine in Azure? Yes or no? Alex, I don't think you need to. Don't take it too seriously that you're overrunning. This is a very, very complex session, and there's so much information to cover that actually this is almost, I think, a 4-hour session if you really deep dive into every aspect of it. So
well,
go over time and then as we said, if people need to jump off, we totally understand. We're doing it for the community, and you can always jump on YouTube afterwards and complete this part of the session that you missed. So don't worry about it. We'll still continue and complete this.
The reality is, in around 2013, whilst I was still in Russia, I moved to the UK in 2013. I used to develop training courses for Microsoft. So Microsoft paid for it. I won't disclose how much, but a lot. I mean, I basically survived on that. I mean, I used to have a lavish lifestyle on that money. So, and I conducted them myself as well. Traveled around, the eastern parts of the world, and some Western Europe as well, Central Europe, and a normal SQL Server licensing and license management training just for SQL Server takes from 8 to 16 hours if you want to cover every single bit without rushing. So I'm trying to squeeze all this information into how much the SQL here is? 1 hour?
Yeah, and you haven't even touched on previous editions.
No, that's an advanced.
No, we haven't even gone that way yet. So, and that even takes it into a more complex environment of Microsoft. So, take your time. We'll get through it.
Yeah. So, but I hope you're still getting value out of this training because we're giving you the core principles anyway. So as long as you understand these core principles, you'll be able to navigate it further, and you'll be able to download the previous product terms, compare them to the current product terms, and say, okay, I get it. If you don't get it, by the way, just send us a message. Leave a comment under this video, I still can't figure out licensing of SQL Server 2014. I respond to every comment, by the way, still on YouTube. I'm not that posh. So, right. Moving on. So Steven thinks the answer is yes. I hope others will follow case and also give an answer. Yes, you can. Yes, you actually can. So Office service, that's the last bit today. Office service, and please click like, but I won't stop here. Office service are the following: license per server plus cal model. Current versions of all these services 2019 as Exchange, Project, SharePoint, and Skype for Business. They, in many regards, they're similar. But there are things that you need to know which are unique to each of these servers. So Exchange Server, there are two editions, Standard and Enterprise. So Exchange Server, this is one of those things that make it different. It still has editions. So SharePoint, for instance, used to have Standard and Enterprise edition. Now it's just SharePoint. Same with Skype for Business server, by the way. So down editioning from Enterprise to Standard is allowed. And you license server licenses as just one license per one instance. So you have an instance of Exchange, you need a license. That's how it works. Obviously, because it's a server plus cal model, you need to license client access. So very important caveat. One of those licensing bullshits that I keep hearing from some of the people, even from Microsoft. You can't buy SQL Server Enterprise license without SQL Server Enterprise CALs. Yes, you can. Because the addition of the server only affects its technical capabilities in terms of the size of the database, number of mail databases, stuff like that. The CALs, the CAL editions, they're not even editions, they're more like levels. The CALs are also called Standard and Enterprise, confusingly. I would rather call them something like base and additive CALs, but they call them Standard and Enterprise. They do not relate to the version of the server. You can have an Exchange Server Enterprise, and you can have all the users licensed with Exchange standard CALs as long as they don't use advanced functionality. That's perfectly okay. And you can have Exchange Server Exchange Server Standard, but users will be using advanced functionality of Exchange, and they would require Exchange Enterprise CALs. Enterprise CAL always requires standard CAL. So in the Microsoft Office service, not in SPLA, so if you're a SPLA licensing person right now on this live, SPLA works entirely differently. It's very messed up. In non-SPLA, in traditional volume licenses, all these servers, except for Project Server, have base and additive CALs. So when there's an additive CAL, in this case, Enterprise is an additive CAL, they always require the base CAL. So you can't buy just the additive CAL. You have to buy, if you need more functionality, you have to buy, like on this slide. If you need more functionality, you have to buy a pair of CALs per either user or device. Standard and Enterprise. There are complicated ways when you get standard through a bundle, but then you need to kind of upgrade it to Enterprise, then you just buy Enterprise CAL. But because you have an equivalent as well, it's still the same thing. You have a base, but just bought differently, and then an additive CAL on top. It's always a sandwich. And Enterprise CAL is always butter on the bread. External access. Exchange Server is the only server in Office service where when you need advanced functionality, you may not you require CALs basically. So all the other servers have all the external access built in, except for Project Server. Anyway, Skype for Business and SharePoint. In Exchange, as long as your external users are only consuming base functionality of Exchange, not the functionality that is listed in small letters on the left in the bottom row, just the base, then in that case, you don't need any CALs or connectors for external users. As soon as they start using, and that's counted per user, as soon as you start assigning them rights to use this advanced functionality, say in-place holds, because it's managed, you manage it. You tell Exchange, this user, I want to give them right to access in-place hold, then that user, even though it's an external user, immediately will require a pair of CALs, Standard plus Enterprise. So I myself made that mistake thinking that an Exchange server external access is always included in the license. Only base functionality. That's a unique thing related to Exchange server. There are obviously CAL equivalents and bundles. So, if you need standard CAL rights, you may also acquire them through one of those bundles that are in this table. And same for the enterprise CAL. The orange color here in this slide highlights those plans that do not include enterprise CAL functionality. And by the way, as I told you, you may combine them in a peculiar way. So you may have Exchange Online Plan 1, which is your standard CAL equivalency. But then if you want to give those users for on-premises service advanced functionality, you may acquire enterprise CAL. And in this case, you don't need to buy a standard CAL because you already have it through an equivalent. If it doesn't make sense, please let me know. Should really make sense. So license dependencies. If you license Exchange Server, it obviously requires Windows Server to run on. So therefore, don't forget to buy Windows Server license or assign it or somehow just calculate that server as required in Windows Server licenses. Same with CALs. If you need access to Exchange, you also need to think that you also need access to Windows Server on which that Exchange runs. Always. It's a dependency. Next, SharePoint Server. No additions in version 2019, just SharePoint Server. One server license per instance. This is like the rule that goes throughout all the Office servers. One license per one instance. No core counting. Just count how many times you installed it. SharePoint Server client access. So CALs are as with Exchange, Enterprise, and Standard. Enterprise CALs are additive as with Exchange, so very similar to Exchange. One of the features unique to SharePoint is when you publish publicly available content, that is the same for internal users and external users. CALs are not required for neither internal or external users. If you just create a website, like say my company website, SAMexpert.com, if I created it on using SharePoint and I wouldn't create any user areas where they would have limited functionality, access to certain features which are not published to the entirety of the population, both internal and external, then you would have to have CALs for those users who require security, fine-tuning, logins, and stuff like that. But for publicly available access, CALs are not required. Otherwise, all external access is included in the server. Doesn't require neither external. There are no connectors in the Office server world anyway. Doesn't require CALs. And for internal access, just typical logic applies. Base functionality, you need standard CAL. Extended functionality, you need standard and enterprise CALs together. Not going to stop on this slide. Those who gave me your email, I'm going to distribute the PDFs with the slides. You'll have this as a cheat sheet, but then you don't need to. You can go to product terms, find the CAL equivalent page, and there are a bit differently written tables with all the CAL equivalents. You can always look it up there. You don't need my slides for that. Dependencies. So a bit more complicated. SharePoint requires SQL to function. Therefore, you need to remember if you run a SharePoint server, you need also Windows Server licenses, SQL Server licenses, Windows Server CALs or external connectors. And if SQL Server is licensed server plus CAL, SQL Server CALs. There are more dependencies than with Exchange. Exchange only requires Windows Server. Skype for Business Server version 2019 has no additions. Server licenses one per instance. One of the, again, unique features of Skype for Business Server, and it's been like this since Link Server, since Office Communication Server, is that some roles do not require licenses. Which means if you install, let me switch to this, flip to this slide. If you install an instance of Skype for Business Server that only runs, hypothetically, I'm not sure that's technically possible, but hypothetically, it only runs Central Management Server role, It's an instance of Skype for Business Server, but because it only runs this role that is listed in additional software, then it doesn't require an instance license. It's basically a free instance. And this is how we counted Link. I remember when we only counted front-end instances or something like that. So yeah, and then all the other roles we just didn't count, and that's perfectly okay. Skype for Business Server has probably the longest additional software list. What additional software in the Microsoft world means that you can take a component, install it separately. It doesn't require additional license. So with Skype for Business Server, count all the instances, but then check what roles they're running, because you may end up paying for instances you don't need to pay for. It's been retired. The product is end of life, most certainly, but it's still in use in many organizations. Still, I mean, I still see Skype for Business Server invitations and stuff like that. Client access. So CALs here are 3 CALs. Standard is base, and either enterprise or plus are additive. So if you need plus functionality, you need plus standard. If you need enterprise functionality, actually I have a slide for that. Then you need enterprise plus standard. I thought as well, I had this mistake in mind many years ago, not recently, is that for plus, you need to buy standard plus enterprise, and then only on top of that sandwich you can put plus. No, it's not like that. It's a one-to-one connection, either standard to plus or standard to enterprise. By the way, if a user requires all functionality, that user only requires 1 standard CAL, 1 enterprise, and 1 plus, not 2 standard CALs. No. You just need to have base, and then you add additional CALs on top. External access entirely without any licenses, not dependent on anything. What else do we have here? Yeah, CAL equivalents. You can see that plus CAL, it's only included in the highest Office 365 and Microsoft 365 packages, because it's a voice. It's an expensive functionality, I would say that. License dependencies also requires Windows Server and SQL Server, like SharePoint, so pay attention to that. Project Server, which is basically an add-on to SharePoint. Technically, it's an add-on to SharePoint. So it runs on top of SharePoint. As when we get to license dependencies, I'll reiterate this, that you need also SharePoint licenses, SharePoint Server licenses and CALs. Windows 2019 has no additions. I don't remember if it actually had any additions ever, but doesn't matter really. Look it up in product terms for previous versions. There's 1 CAL type, just Project Server CAL. That's it. No base additive, no standard enterprise. It's available either per user per device. All the other CALs, by the way, are available either per user per device. External access here, by the way, sorry, let me go back to that, because I need to emphasize this. External access to Project Server requires client access licenses, because it runs on SharePoint. An interesting thing suddenly pops to my mind is that SharePoint CALs still have to follow the rules of external and internal access, but project CALs are required for every user of the project server. Yep, CAL equivalents. It has a very interesting CAL equivalent. Every project 2019 professional, actually every project professional, but you need 2019 professional because the CAL version must be either equal or higher than the version of the server. Includes every license, and it's a device license, includes a device CAL. And for online subscriptions, these 2 subscriptions, Project Essentials and Project Plan, either 1 or 3 or 5, you use a subscription license. They include an equivalent of a user CAL for Project Server. Dependencies, as I said before, in addition to Windows Server and SQL Server, you require also SharePoint server licenses and necessary CALs as per the rules applying to those products. Reassigning licenses, like SQL Server, these products have license mobility in server farms only. So licensability section in the product terms is a bit messed up because it doesn't say what exactly licensability is available. You need to dig deeper, go to other sections of product terms. It just says licensability, yes. But I remind you, licensability in server farms is a right to move across the farm in real time without the 90 days rule. Licensability through software assurance is a right to bring the licenses to providers. So these licenses may not be brought to multi-tenant environments because they don't have licensability through server farms. So through software assurance. They don't have licensability through software assurance. So no bring your own license into multi-tenant onto multi-tenant hardware in any cases. Software assurance considerations you need it for licensability in server farms. And remember that cows must also have software assurance. And list is not as long as impressive as with SQL Server, but still, there's one consideration. If you virtualize it, you can get rights for unlimited on-premises Office server deployment of all of this service except for project server. So project server does not include Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business. But these instances that you deploy under these rights that you can only get through an enterprise agreement and through the plans E3, E5, Microsoft E3 and E5. So this is a very narrow limitation. Only EA, only Microsoft 365 E3, E5. Only those users that are assigned these licenses are allowed to access those servers that you deployed under this right. So if you have half of your organization covered with this license and half of your organization covered with like F1, they may not access these on-premises services. Very restricted rule. Right. Because we are very tired.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I left a very simple question at the end.
Yeah, so then let's quickly go through this. I know you're coming to the end of the session. Does Exchange Enterprise CAL Client Access License also require Exchange Standard CAL? A simple yes or no answer. Does Exchange Enterprise CAL also require Exchange Standard CAL?
I guess we don't really need to keep the question on the screen. If you have any questions still, please type it in the chat. So I know you're all tired. I told you it's going to be a long session. I have no idea how to make it shorter without splitting it in two. So I have a note about training sessions 6 and 7. So the 6th one, which is in 2 weeks from now, that's about surviving Microsoft audits. Yeah, going back to the question, by the way. So yes, it does. It's the correct answer is A. And the 7th is about Microsoft negotiations. So I know that probably if you're just interested in Microsoft licensing, you don't want to go on those. Why would you listen about audits or negotiations? But let me remind you that if you want to pass a test, we're going to have questions about audits and negotiations because this is a license management training. And audits and negotiations are essential parts of license management. And by the way, in the Surviving Microsoft audits, I'm going to cover, not very much in depth, but considerations regarding software asset management tools. So if you're interested in hearing mine and Daryl's experience and mistakes we made, the battle scars we have with battling with the tools and trying to make them work, what works for Microsoft, what doesn't, what you need to pay attention to, I encourage you to come to that Microsoft audit session. Because audits start, preparation for an audit starts now. Preparation for an audit starts with you taking care of, I would say, the best audit is won even before the audit. Battle is won even before the battle. Good general wins battle even before the battle itself. Same here. So and making sure you have trustworthy data is an essential part of that. And yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, Steven. Sorry to keep you,
Alex. I want to thank you on behalf of the community for a really, really interesting session, and for you showing up even though that you're not feeling at your best. So yeah, on behalf of everybody, appreciate
thank
it.
you, Zaro. I'm going straight to bed now.
You do that, and yeah, we'll catch up tomorrow.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Zaro.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Appreciate it.
And by the way, not regarding the training itself, we have a webinar. I would call it a webinar, another live stream next week, which is not part of the training, which is 10 big ideas negotiating with Microsoft we learned this year. So if you want to hear about what we learned from what's going on right now in the extremely rapidly changing world of Microsoft license, I would say licensing, I would say license sales and license management. The licensing almost isn't changing. Please come next week, same time, 2 o'clock British time, 9 o'clock East Coast, United States, 7:30 Delhi, as far as I remember, 7:30 p.m. So go and have a deserved vodka. I might actually. I have a bottle of sake. I have a bottle of sake. I love sake. Right.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Ninja.
Alex.
See? Thanks, Daryl.
We take a break.
Everybody. You too. Thanks, Daryl. Thank you for helping me today. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.